Feminism is all about a woman's right to choose.
Woman's right to choose. Woman's right to choose. Woman's right to...
Trigger warning. In this video, I will be discussing the physical abuse of women by men.
Feminism is all about a woman's choose to choose.
So I've decided to start a series of series, the first of which was a series I'm starting called I'm a Christian, where I explain what it means for me to be a Christian. Of course, now I'm starting a new series called I'm a Radical Feminist. Now, something I want to clarify right away is that this is not really an educational series. I don't want people watching this thinking it will explain what it means to be a radical feminist. These videos are personal, and they are also quite distinctly male. They are from the perspective of an outsider looking in. This is from the perspective of somebody who read Andrea Dworkin and didn't see examples of oppression I've experienced, but instead oppression I've perpetuated. So something I'm going to be frank about here is that there are misogynistic elements to my past and to my present, so just bear in mind that this isn't going to be a video where I say that everything is fine, and on a personal level men and women are basically fine, and feminism is just a political issue. Because the personal is political, so this is going to get very personal. One feature of this is that I will emote a lot in this series. When discussing things like pornography, I will be having a discourse and engaging with academic sources, or at least basing my arguments on them. But I'm also going to be honest about the personal negative effects pornography has had on me personally. And in this video, I will talk about the negative effects that the normalization of abusive and degrading sex has had on me, and that might be quite jarring stuff, so just be aware of that. One final note before I end this preamble is that this video will be in part a response to Contra-points. This won't be a direct response because I'm going to go off on tangents, and I don't want Contra or her fans to think that every single argument I address in this video is an argument that I'm assuming she made. So now I'm going to begin this video as I originally scripted it, which was without this preamble. In my video on Sargon, I made a joke where I spoke about a problematic thumbnail used by Sargon for this video, and I was going to try and make an irreverent joke about Lacey Green's boobs, where I implied that it would almost be worth being a iDubbbz knockoff, like Chris Ray Gun, just to experience them. And then I was going to substantiate this joke by going into a bit more detail. I was going to talk about how I wanted to slap them and punch them and squeeze them and clamp them, tie them up until the blood flow cuts off, drive pins, nails and screws into them, and then whip them all while she's begging for mercy. And the reason I was going to say all of this was to set up two sarcastic remarks. Firstly, about how this is perfectly healthy male sexuality that doesn't signify any entrenched misogyny, and secondly, that nobody ought to kink-shame me because the worst crime imaginable would be to kink-shame me. The reason I didn't include this joke was firstly because it wasn't very funny, and I wouldn't want people to be confused about why I was making a pretty shitty attempt at sarcastic on-the-nose satire, and secondly, because I was worried that people would maybe not really get that it was a joke. So let me just make this clear now. I am a kink-shamer. I know this because I have shamed people for their kinks, because their kinks are worthy of shame. I mentioned previously that I, on the whole, dislike Contra-points, but the only video of hers I actually physically disliked was her video on kink-shaming, which was just so fucking dumb. And this isn't going to be a direct response, but I hope I can convey some of what makes me hate that video quite as much as I do. Now, one of the defenses people have of any given kink is, but what if the woman consents? What if the description I gave of what I would do to Lacey Green was something she consented to? After all, we all know from porn that women seem willing to consent to things, at least for the right price, and kinks, that is, the porn site kinks, cute little videos, inform us that actually the girls are quite happy about these things, and their experiences that they've always wanted to try out. So let's grant for a second the claim that a woman might agree to let me abuse her in this manner. So what? Permit an analogy for a second. Imagine I found a black man who was willing to march around my house saying, "I'm a stupid nigger. I deserve to be a slave. I done gone being so dumb, Mr. Michael, sir. Hey, boss, we feeling okay? You white men sure do know how to treat us dumb niggers, right?" Bear in mind, this black person is willing to do these things. So why is it still a problem? Why are some people probably going to be angry at me for even scripting that out and saying these words? Why is it so objectionable for me to use the word nigger in this way, even if I did have the so-called nigger pass that so many white boys seem to care about having? I think the reason is simple. We can recognize that even though there is consent between two individuals, and thus the action can be considered consensual, we are still witnessing an act of social domination by a dominant group over an oppressed group. A white man is clearly deriving a perverse pleasure from watching a black man debase himself along clearly racial lines. This point was made by Julia Long in her book Anti-Porn, The Resurgence of Anti-Pornography Feminism, where she makes this claim. It is incontrovertible that pornography puts certain representations into circulation, representations which are produced and used in specific ways. The key question is, what is the social meaning and function of these representations? If we accept that gender and sexuality are socially constructed through social institutions and practices as diverse as children's toys and literature, education, systems of law, and medicine and so forth, it seems reasonable to accept that pornography as a discourse and practice plays a similar role in the social construction of sexual and gendered identity. Given the content of hegemonic pornography, which we have already established has dominant patterns of male aggression and violence directed at women, and its purpose as a cultural product for the sexual arousal of men, it again seems reasonable to believe that pornography plays a role in shaping normative ideas of male dominance and female subordination. Hegemonic porn is a practice, a homosocial means by which men share stories, stories that provide ways of thinking about the nature of men, women, and sex. She then makes the analogy with gollywogs and other racial depictions in society during a bygone era. It didn't need to be demonstrated that an individual black person objected to this, nor did it need to be shown that such actions increase oppression against unconsenting black people. Instead, all that needed to be understood is that these depictions represented a real domination of white people over black people. Now, before we continue, I want to define BDSM. I would define BDSM as the physical or verbal abuse of a sex partner, the intentional degradation of a sex partner, or the simulated suspension of a sex partner's capacity to consent. So slapping, spanking or choking, the use of swear words against them, spitting on them or standing on their heads, or the use of physical restraints, the pinning down of body parts, or an artificial attempt by the submissive sex partner to escape. These are all things that are present in mainstream pornography. All of these are things that I have done multiple times in sex. But you have to think, what does this say about women? What does it say about the man who enjoys these things? Sex is a principal form of enjoyment for adults. So what would it say if another principal form of enjoyment was the whipping of black men, the use of the word nigger against black men, spitting on black men, chaining up black men, having black men simulate a condition of bondage and subordination? What would that say in a world where this practice only occurred where black men consented to it? Would that make it okay? No, because who the fuck would enjoy that? If somebody says that they enjoy dominating black men and putting black men into subordination, then what should we say regardless of whether or not the participating black man consents? We should say, holy fuck dude, it's fucked up that you would enjoy that and you're a racist. So why is it that when somebody says that they enjoy slapping women and spitting on women and calling women worthless cunts, we reserve our speculations on the attitude towards women based on whether or not the women involved consent? To be honest, and I don't want to be misconstrued here, it's not really relevant whether or not they consent. Now don't get me wrong, rape is bad. Doing these things to a woman who doesn't consent would be committing rape. But that question of whether consent or rape has occurred is a question that exists independent of the more valid observation that no matter what the woman's opinion is on the matter, the fact that the clear subordination of women unto men is occurring as a means of perverse sexual pleasure is already objectionable, and the objection about the content and character of the sex act is unaffected by the consent of participating parties. I will only ask this one more time. What can we learn about the desires of a person if a principal way that they derive enjoyment from individuals of the opposing sex is through whipping and beating and verbally abusing them? What can we learn about a society that creates people who want to hurt women? Now some people might say, hold up, you're being a bit silly here, because what about femdom or lesdom? In Contra's video, she's wearing a peculiar outfit, and she does two things by wearing that outfit. Firstly, by casting the domineer as a woman, she sets up the woman as the dominating party in BDSM relationships. Secondly, by dressing up in an outfit, she turns BDSM into an other that we can detach from ourselves. It's like the depiction of the rapist as a big hairy black man as opposed to a nice non-threatening white boy. We can believe that rape is something that only occurs among a certain easily identifiable group of people. Likewise, this use of BDSM outfits to symbolize BDSM implies that this is only an issue that relates to the people with latex bodysuits in their wardrobe. But here's the problem. Femdom is not the norm. Yes, there are men out there who enjoy having their balls kicked by women. There are men out there who enjoy cuckoldry. There are men out there who enjoy ruined orgasms. But you know what? It's not mainstream, and the abuse of women is. You can find on Tinder women who will have in their profile that they want to be choked and slapped during sex. It's a mainstream thing. It's not the person in the latex or the leather. I said earlier that I had done everything I listed in my example of BDSM activities, but I never put on a fucking costume for it. I didn't need a costume. All I needed was the capacity to derive sexual pleasure from hurting and degrading women and putting women in a position of subordination relative to me. Men hurting women for pleasure is not the dominatrix in the Stasi YouTube video. Men hurting women is Christian Grey normalizing the idea that being possessive and emotionally unstable is sexy. And you know what? People who enjoy beating women are emotionally unstable. People who hurt women for pleasure and fun are not healthy people. The society that creates these people is sick. And these people aren't a minority. These people are most of the men having sex. And if they're not doing it, they want to do it, because they're watching it in porn. The majority of porn has this. The majority of porn has women being spat on. The majority of porn has forceful deep throat. The majority of porn has anal. It's not empowering. It's not liberating. If you are a woman who thinks that the majority of guys watching this stuff are coming out of it with healthy attitudes towards women, you're an idiot. If you are a woman who thinks that being choked and slapped and spat on is good, then you are wrong. If you think that the guy who calls you a cunt as he ejaculates respects women once the sex is over, then you are mistaken. I'm not saying that this is universal, but I am saying it's common enough that it's a problem. When I had abusive sex with women, it was not a joke. It was not a game. If you're calling a woman a worthless slut who is less than dirt as you fuck her in the arse with spit on her face, then it is a manifestation of a hatred that doesn't go away once the sex is over. The hatred of women stays there because it is a hatred that you learn to feel from society and you learn to express through porn, and then you put it into practice on women who think that sexual boundaries are oppressive and being choked is empowering. And that's the mainstream. That's what happens every day. That's what's happening between normal couples. And you can say, oh, it's just you, other guys are different. But here's the thing. The women that I had abusive sex with didn't think I was a misogynist. Shockingly, some of them loved me. Now, I didn't love most of those women because at that point in my life I was a pornography addict. But these women would have sex with me where I would literally tell them that they would never be loved. I literally said that to a girlfriend of mine as we were having sex, but she thought I was a nice guy. So you have to ask yourself, the guys who are doing this, the guys who are beating and choking women for fun, I'm sure they seem nice, and like they could never really want to hurt women. Just like the rapists who get let off with a slap on the wrist, they just seem like they're too nice to have misogynistic thoughts. And you might say that you're a guy and you're a feminist and you're fine with BDSM. Well, guess what? All of what I'm saying in terms of the attitudes I had to women and sex didn't stop when I became a feminist, because I was told by the liberal feminist pro-sex fanatics that it was just fine. Because the girls on Tinder will help you lie to yourself, because they'll lie to you by repeating the lies that have been told ever since Playboy and the pornographers hijacked the sexual revolution. And then we wonder why there are so many rapists when we are endorsing attitudes that cause rape. Do you think the guy who ties up consenting women and the guy who rapes unconsenting women don't share a mutual interest in sex with an unconsenting party? Because it seems to me like what all this kink stuff is about is riding the line between consent and non-consent. Yeah, they consent, but that's not very fun. So let's pretend that they aren't consenting. She's consenting, but let's have her call me daddy. Because I just can't get off without harkening back to exploitative, incestuous child abuse. Don't get me wrong, I love consent. Nobody loves consent more than me. Us kinky people, we're all about consent. Oh sure, yeah, I want the girl I'm fucking to beg me to stop. Yeah, of course, nothing makes me harder than that. But I love consent, I love consent. This is mainstream, and femdom isn't. The only possible femdom thing that's become mainstream is eating arse. The idea that all men need to profess that they eat arse seems to have become very mainstream. But when that practice entered the mainstream, any sense of female domination that might have come with it was absent. Guys eat arse in the same pornos where they stand on women's heads and fuck them in the arses. So yes, we see it in the mainstream, we see it in the porn guys watch and the sex guys have, but at that point it isn't femdom. It's worth remembering that femdom is still a male fantasy. The femdom porn is being made principally by men and being made principally for men. We can't really posit that femdom is a counter to phallic imperialism when it's still being made in a male-dominated industry in a male-dominated culture for men. And it's the mainstream that matters, because there will always be exceptions to a rule. But men choking women isn't an exception to the culture, it's the rule. Men spanking women is the rule. And as for lesdom, I'm in no position to comment, but I would just point out that lesbians are very overrepresented in the radical feminist movement, so I think it's pretty ridiculous to play that card. Also, of course, most lesdom is a product of misogyny. Most lesdom I can think of is stuff where women basically beat each other up for men's entertainment. Healthy male sexuality loves to masturbate to two women physically assaulting each other, but I'm sure the liberal feminists will tell me it's actually empowering. People often use the terms sex negative and sex positive to describe their positions. I prefer to use the terms sex inclusive and sex exclusive. You see, sex positive people are sex exclusive. They're feminists about everything, except for sex. Sex is the one area where no feminist analysis is necessary. They'll tell you how women being shown as stupid or as sex objects in films is wrong, but women literally being called dumb whores in porn is empowering as long as they're consenting. Sex-negative feminists are sex-inclusive. We're feminists, and we're willing to say that one doesn't stop being feminist in the bedroom. And at this point, I think people can only say, well, what do you want? What's the alternative? Are people only ever going to have missionary where they can't enjoy it? One of my favourite criticisms is that this is restricting the acts of sex. But the act of sex doesn't have an a priori definition. The fact that we nowadays often include acts of violence in our definition of sex was not something written in the stars or passed down from the objective language gods. Men define sex, pornography defines sex, patriarchy defines sex, and it defines sex to include that which hurts women. And now people say that they're restricting the types of sex that people can have. Not really, because in my book, choking someone isn't sex, it's just choking someone. All you're doing is hurting somebody for your pleasure, that's it. And here's the thing, let's not beat around the bush here. I'm a Christian. I was saved from pornography by Jesus. I am ex-porn now. As someone who is also an ex-drinker, I can tell you there's nothing better than waking up every morning without a hangover. But with porn, you don't get hangovers. You instead get a long-term shift in the way that you view women. So it's a long-term problem, and there isn't a short-term solution. But you know what? Since I quit porn, I've got into long-term relationships. And I'm not the type of person who believes you have to wait for marriage, but I do now believe you should love the person you're having sex with. You should trust them, and you should feel safe with them. And you know what? For the past year or so, I've just been having missionary. Genuinely, that thing you edgy kinksters make fun of people for doing, I've been doing. And you know what? It's pretty great. And I want a world where that's what sex is. It's a thing that happens between people who love each other and want to have sex. And obviously, there are systemic issues with heterosexual sex. And I don't want to imply that switching from less explicitly abusive sex will automatically remove all the entrenched issues of heterosexual sex. And to me, it doesn't make sense that people look at a world where one half of the population is hurting the other half to get off, and that's just fine. But when I say that a different world would be better, I get vanilla shamed. That's the only word for it. And sometimes it gets genuinely nasty, with people insisting that my significant other must be unsatisfied. I've met anti-feminists who have said that I'm a beta cuck and an alpha would fuck my girlfriend so much better. And then I've met liberal feminists, sex-exclusive feminists, and kinksters who say the same thing. I say that I have on paper perhaps more boring sex, but it is far more emotionally fulfilling because it's with someone who I can most truly love. And I achieve that by not spitting on them, or hurting them, or calling them horrible names. But all these abusers can say is that, oh, that's not really what women want. All women really want a guy who's going to dominate them, and you're trying to be all nice with your vanilla sex, you fucking cuck. Well, I bet your SO fucking hates it. And this isn't coming from anti-feminists. This is coming from people who support BDSM. The people who might as well be anti-feminists because they support abusing women. And there are bigger things in play here than my fragile masculinity being hurt. I don't particularly care if people question my ability to satisfy people sexually. I'm used to it having been a male feminist. I didn't anticipate having to face it from people who call themselves feminists, but since I've become a radical feminist, that has been on the rise. What bothers me more than this is that you will now see this pressuring of girls to do these things. If you go onto forums about sex or anything that's about the sex-positive movement, there's a thin veneer of it being about choice. But you'll see very quickly people saying that if you don't deep throat, you're boring. And if the guy is forcing your head down, then that just shows he enjoys it. And obviously Cosmo needs to tell you how to give the perfect blowjob. Don't forget the fact you're unreasonable if you don't want to try anal. And in addition to this, you get all this stuff about how girls watch porn just as much as guys, and any girl who says they don't watch porn is lying. And I imagine this is really frustrating for the girls I know who don't watch porn, who are told that their entire existence is a lie made up by prudes, when what they actually are is women who don't buy into this narrative that this industry that was made by men is empowering for women. Now before I finish, I just want to make a few points about Contra's video.
Feminism is all about a woman's right to choose.
This is literally the argument I just laugh at, because I've mentioned this before, but if you say that feminism is just about women who are socialized in a patriarchal society being able to freely act out the consequences of that patriarchy without any sort of criticism or analysis, then your feminism falls apart. Also, making people think about the effects of their choices isn't taking away their ability to choose. Encouraging women to enter STEM isn't taking away their ability to choose, it's merely counteracting their social exclusion from STEM. Encouraging women to think about why it might be that they want to be abused during sex, and also what that might encourage in the people who are abusing them, isn't taking away their right to choose. It's helping their right to choose by giving them a greater perspective.
I think it's not really your place to question whether an adult woman knows what she wants.
It's not about questioning what you want. As the straw feminist says in this video, it doesn't really matter what you want. You want to let men beat you up? Fine. You want to encourage sexism. Just like the black man who wants to star as a racially objectionable black stereotype. Sure, they want it. They want to seriously set back the liberation of their oppressed group. Fine. I don't care. But also, saying people's choices are conditioned isn't patronizing. I know anti-feminists love to say this, but it's not an argument. It's just manipulation. Good job. You framed a legitimate criticism of sexist society in such a way that it sounds like I'm the real misogynist. Well done. Now can we actually have a discussion about the reality that we live in a sexist society?
And we all have to live with the desires we have. So if I choose, in full knowledge of the darkness, that I want to act out my dark fantasies in a responsible way with consenting adults, then I don't see what basis the Abigail Cockbanes of the world have to scold me for my choice.
It causes problems in the short term. The conditioning of men to be sexist by violent pornography isn't something that takes multiple lifetimes. It takes a fraction of a lifetime. I don't know how long you have to get off to pornography until you end up eventually thinking naturally that women enjoy being verbally abused and slapped around. But we aren't born hating women. It's learned. And if tomorrow we decided to stop glorifying BDSM and call it what it is, hurting women, then basically what would happen is the people who have embraced their desire to hurt women for sexual pleasure would be out of a sexual outlet. And in the long term, people would realize that the only reason they wanted to hurt women sexually is because they've been raised in a society that hates women. Finally, Contra-points has the straw feminist reveal that actually she is very turned on by the idea of being dominated. This is fucked up. This is rapist logic. It's the idea that deep down these feminists, they're just fucking man-haters, and all they need is a good bit of discipline, and let's all thumb it up. All these women who talk about not liking having to live in a society that normalizes the abuse of women for sexual pleasure, they just need a good dicking, don't they? Come on, feminists, let's respond to this message how feminists should. What does this woman want? Does she want women to be respected during sex? Does she want a culture that calls clear subordination of one social group to another bad? Does she want affirmative consent based on a clear understanding that your boundaries don't make you oppressed or prudish? Or does she just want to be bent over, spanked, and the grateful recipient of a cock? Good job, feminism. I love Contra-points. She's the best SJW YouTuber. You can tell because of all the people who hate SJW YouTubers like her. She's cool. Sex is cool. Thank you, feminism. I'm going to slap a woman and feel proud that I'm fighting the evil forces of kink-shaming. Now, before I wrap things up, I feel like I should direct you to an actual woman because her opinion is better than mine because I have a dick. I'm going to link to a blog post that made me become a dirty fucking kink-shamer. Now, that doesn't mean I agree with everything in the blog, but just check it out, because when it comes to these gender issues, don't take my word for it. Check it out for yourselves. God bless. Answer me when I call, O God of my right. You gave me room when I was in distress. Be gracious to me, and hear my prayer. How long, you people, shall my honour suffer shame? How long will you love vain words and seek after lies. You know that the Lord has set apart the faithful for him. The Lord hears when I call to him. When you are disturbed, do not sin. Ponder it on your beds and be silent. Offer right sacrifices, and put your trust in the Lord. There are many who say, "Oh, that we might see some good. Let the light of your face shine on us, O Lord." You have put gladness in my heart, more than when their grain and wine abound. I will both lie down and sleep in peace. For you alone, O Lord, make me lie down in safety. Amen.